Miko, Zilla. Miko, Zilla. You're famous. Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Miko Zilla. Today is the first ever episode of Normal People Scare Me, because weirdos do everything better than normals. Normies? I don't know. So today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite television series, one of my favorite franchises, which is of course American Horror Story. I've been a fan of American Horror Story since the first year it came out, which I believe was 2011-2012, and have been a fan ever since. If you don't know what American Horror Story is, it's an American anthology series by Ryan Murphy that follows a different cast of characters and a different storyline for every season. As the seasons went on, they did start to tie in some of these stories, creating kind of like their own little cinematic universe. There is a lot of contention in the American Horror Story community about which season's the best, and since this is the internet, I thought it was appropriate to put in my 2 cents and give the definitive ranking of American Horror Story seasons. I'm going to be talking about these from worst to best. If you have seen my unpopular opinions video, you already know what my favorite season is, but I will be elaborating on that more. And if you haven't seen my unpopular opinions video, I'm sorry, you don't get rewarded with spoilers for not watching my other content. You'll just have to go watch that one first, come back to this, or watch that one after. Whatever you want to do, just click that subscribe button, hit the like button, and give me a comment below. Let me know what your favorite season of American Horror Story is, or let me know your full ranking. I'd love to see that in the comments. And if you're gonna fight, just do it in the comments, please. Like, that's really gonna help me out in the algorithm. Activity, engagement, social media. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and get into my list, so we'll jump right in. We are starting on my list, and of course we are starting from my least favorite, the worst, in my opinion. A lot of people love this one, is Freak Show. I did not enjoy Freak Show as much as I was really hoping / thinking I was going to. Before the season aired, I was excited for it to be, you know, a period piece similar to like Asylum, where they went back in time and it wasn't modern. I thought it was really successful in Asylum, so I assumed, you know, things would transfer over. This follows a cast of characters who belong to a freak show, as the name would suggest, and all kinds of crazy things start happening. My favorite part of the season, as much as it pains me to say, is the Twisty the Clown saga. If you know me, you know I hate clowns, so that was like really effective horror for me. I thought Twisty was one of the scariest clowns ever, right up there with Pennywise. I liked that even though Twisty was only in the first handful of episodes, he kind of passes the torch down to, I believe the character's name is Dandy, who is a rich kid who becomes obsessed with the freak show and wants to be part of it. But he's kind of ostracized from the freaks for being rich, white, cis, male, you know, everything that's not a freak in society. And he goes into a murderous rage. That's not even the only storyline. For me, it kind of got convoluted with too many things going on, but what was cool about this season also is the tie-in to Asylum, where you see the character Pepper in her journey, how she ended up at Briarcliff Asylum. Other than that, wasn't super fan of this season. I love Jessica Lange. This was her last season with American Horror Story. And although I appreciate how much screen time and things they gave her, I think it was a little bit too much of just celebrating her instead of focusing on the story that's going to keep people captivated. They did a lot of random musical numbers, and it was just okay. So that's definitely my least favorite. The next season we're going to be talking about is American Horror Story Asylum. This was the second season in the American Horror Story series, and it really kind of set the tone for what we can expect from various seasons, because when the first season, Murder House, ended, it kind of seemed like the story was over, but it kind of seemed like they could have continued on with it. And when they came out with Asylum, whole new storyline, very dark, it just kind of like set the tone for how the series would progress and continue trying to top itself. Asylum was really interesting and dark. Probably one of the seasons I've rewatched the least, just because it kind of affects me mentally. Watching it just kind of makes me sad. It of course circles around a mental asylum back in, I believe this was like the 40s or the 50s. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Anyway, I don't know if you're familiar with the history of mental health, but back in the day, people with mental health issues and mental disabilities were treated so unfairly. They were experimented on, tortured, othered, forgotten about, and that's kind of what the season revolves around. What I liked about this season is it incorporated a lot of different horror elements. For example, there's aliens, there's serial killers, there's demons, there's a lot of supernatural things happening, and a lot of very real human drama. And a lot of these characters are in the asylum for these things that people say are crazy, like one of the main characters' wife gets abducted by aliens, and everyone thinks he murdered her. So it kind of shows, to an extreme extent, that these people weren't believed in their delusions, even though as the viewer you know the delusions to be true. It was an interesting portrait of that time in mental health. The thing I did not like about this season is that I feel that they burned through a lot of ideas really quickly in this one season, and for that reason it became kind of like convoluted. There were so many different storylines happening, but they all took place in the asylum. So it had the central linchpin keeping everything together, but it got just a little bit hectic, and I think that's all I'm gonna say about Asylum. So the next season I'm gonna be talking about is the very first season of American Horror Story to ever premiere, which was Murder House. Murder House is the standard, I'd say. It really set the stage for what the series could and would be. I think overall it was a little slow in points, but they really made every episode interesting in speaking about the backstory of a different ghost that lived in Murder House. And of course the family, the Harmon family that moves in with their teenage daughter, who then falls in love with a ghost, and that became like a huge Tumblr thing, and yada yada yada. Anyway, what this season does successfully is they really solidified the rules as far as kind of the ghost rules. Like, where you die is where your spirit is attached to. You can't really leave. This season was also successful in creating horror imagery that became kind of iconic to the series, most notably the Rubber Man, which has the element of sexuality but also fear, and that's kind of the tone that the show tends to veer towards most of the time. Is there's strong horror elements, but there's also human drama and sexuality thrown in there. It's an interesting melting pot, and I think it keeps things interesting. Thing that I didn't like about this season, like I said, it was just a little bit slow in points, and I don't love romanticizing, you know, like a school shooter. I think that's a little weird. Not certain if they would do that in a modern season, but although, yeah, they definitely would do that again in a modern season. Overall, this season's really good and I like to rewatch it, but compared to some of the other seasons, it's less memorable and less exciting. We're gonna go ahead and talk about the next season on the list, which is Hotel. When it came out, I thought it was gonna be my favorite season of all time because of course Lady Gaga had joined the cast. This was the first season that Jessica Lange was not involved in, so I think they added a lot of high-profile cast members to keep things interesting. This season centers around a storyline about vampires. Lady Gaga is the Countess, kind of the head vampire bitch, and there's a lot of drama surrounding her and the hotel that she owns. There are also a lot of ghosts in this season that live in the hotel that are bound to the hotel, and they follow sort of the same ghost rules as in Murder House. There is also a tie-in in this season where Gabourey Sidibe, who played a character in season 3, actually comes to visit the Hotel Cortez and unfortunately meets her demise. I thought it was so unnecessary to make Queenie die, especially because she was such a great character in Coven, so that was questionable. But it's a fun little tie-in. They like doing the tie-ins at that point. It's really fun as a fan to like see Easter eggs and make those connections. Anyway, I think Hotel suffered from having too many white men that look the same. Yeah, I don't know. It was a good story. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Again, just tended to get a little slow. This is where you really started seeing the trend where the season starts out really, really strong, and then the story kind of gets weaker towards the end, which unfortunately becomes a trend in American Horror Story. So this wasn't my favorite, but I loved the stylization of it. Lady Gaga, of course, was gorgeous. I think this was the thing that really set her up in her acting career, and I don't know if she would have been doing A Star is Born had it not been for American Horror Story Hotel. I think that was really cool. I'd like to see her return in one of the newer seasons. I know she's really busy, but whatever. The next season I'm talking about is Apocalypse, which was season 8. I really enjoyed this season. It was kind of interesting because I had heard there would be a tie-in with Coven going into it, but I didn't know how or why. So when the season started, it is of course about the apocalypse, which is triggered by nuclear warfare. The first episode alone gave me enough anxiety to never sleep again. It starts out so intense. They're in LA and the sirens keep going off. Everybody's trying to make it to safety, but of course, you know, pretty much everyone dies. We're then put into a underground bunker that is highly stylized. I think they took a lot of inspiration from Suspiria. It just started out really dark and apocalypsy, and then about midway through the season there's a tie-in with the witches from season 3, which is Coven, and that ended up taking a large portion of the season, and it kind of turned it from being like super dark and existential to being a little bit more campy and lighthearted. I thought it was a highly inventive plot. It is the most tie-ins that they've ever had in one season as far as I'm aware, because in addition to the witches in Coven, they also have a whole episode dedicated to returning to Murder House, which was amazing. And the best part about that episode is the return of Jessica Lange to American Horror Story to reprise her role from the first season. She has a fabulous death scene, and she's just such a captivating actor. I could watch her in anything all the time, always. Anyway, Apocalypse was really interesting, and I thought it was really, really fun. I thought it was a fun season. Okay, the next season we're talking about is Coven. Coven was my favorite season for quite some time, just because of how fucking fun it was. I think this season really put the show on the map, whatever anyone else likes to claim about it or say. They added so many new cast members to this season. Emma Roberts, Gabourey Sidibe. They had Kathy Bates, this was her first season with the show. They had Angela Bassett, this was her first season with the show. All of the additions to the cast were so incredibly strong. And of course the returning cast members that always deliver characters and amazing acting skills. So this season was just such a fun, wild ride. The whole thing is like, oh, who's the next Supreme? And it kind of threw you into this culture of witches that they've created. I absolutely love when Stevie Nicks guest starred. I thought that was so much fun because I love Fleetwood Mac, obviously, and I love Stevie Nicks. So, just a fabulous season. The fashion was amazing. Everybody after the season just wanted to dress like a super chic witch. I love that it's set in New Orleans. I thought that added a bunch of flavor to the background of it, and especially the tie-ins with the voodoo witches. The whole plot was great. I loved it. Definitely still to this day one of the ones that I've rewatched the most and will be most comforted by a rewatch. Also, Kathy Bates being a headless, like, immortal person was just so funny. I love Kathy Bates so much. Okay, we are down to the final 3 seasons. If you're familiar with the show, you probably know which ones. And if you've seen my unpopular opinions, you know my favorite one. It's not that much of a secret, but it's fine. Who watches my videos? I don't even know. We're down to the last 3 seasons. The next one we're talking about is Cult! Cult! I don't know why I did that little dance. It's fine. I think Cult was a really divisive season in the franchise and the fandom for its use of politics in the story. This, of course, takes place in 2016 as he who shall not be named is elected the highest office in our country. And it depicts the struggle of a woman with high anxiety about the situation. She's a lesbian, played by Sarah Paulson. She also has a lot of other phobias, and she begins being plagued by this troupe of clowns. Which again, I'm really scared of clowns, so again, this was very effective for me, and I love the character design of the clowns. And they are also terrifying the community at large. Come to find out, the clowns are all part of a cult that is starting to plan a political revolution based on using people's fears against them. As the season progresses, you start wondering who around this character is in the cult? Why are they targeting her? And you really start questioning everyone that she interacts with. A lot of crazy plot things happen. People join the cult, people leave the cult, people are getting murdered left and right, and it turns into this grandiose scheme. The one thing I did not appreciate about this season was the whole scum cult, whatever they called themselves, the women cult that was behind the Zodiac killings. I felt that was a little unnecessary to add, but, you know, other than that, it was such a small, like, detail. My absolute favorite part of the season is Evan Peters. He nails every role that he takes on, but in this season, it seemed so challenging to not only play the cult leader, and I mean, hey, I kind of look like Kai with my blue hair. Trend alert. So he plays the cult leader in Cult, but he also portrays other cult leaders throughout history, including Charles Manson. He also plays Andy Warhol in a flashback where Andy Warhol narrowly escapes being assassinated. His acting was so emotional and raw, and just, you can really tell he channeled that rage of these people he was portraying. And I know he's talked about how it really kind of fucked him up mentally, but his performance in this season is next to none. And it gets really intense, real world. Cult, I hate to be, say something controversial yet brave, is that Cult was a documentary. And again, you can fight me in the comments. The next season on my list is the most recent season, which of course was American Horror Story 1984. This season really stands out to me for being more whimsical and taking itself less seriously than some of the other seasons, which I found refreshing because while they're trying to be this high art, they're also trying to pander to like base desires. So I think when they get too heady and like take themselves too seriously, the fan reaction isn't quite as good as when they just let themselves have fun. And let me tell you, this season was fun! First of all, it's the 1980s, what's not to love? There's fashion. The soundtrack to this season was so fun. Aerobics ended up being a big part of this. And there are so many killers in this season that it's ridiculous. There's so many killers in this season. And the killers are fighting each other. Everyone doesn't know what's going on. There's ghosts. This story centers around a camp that on the night before the campers arrive starts getting attacked by a serial killer named Mr. Jingles, who famously attacked the camp 10 years ago. The camp counselors who was reviving the camp was allegedly a survivor of Mr. Jingles, who will cut off your ear as a souvenir. That camp counselor is played by Leslie Grossman, and she is hilarious. She just brings this like whimsy and this like charisma and like level of comedy to the roles, even when she's, you know, being a bitch or being like a cult member. And what's also interesting about this season is that most of it takes place over the course of one night, and as the season progressed and I'm watching every episode, I'm like, when is this night ever gonna end? And the funniest of all time moment to me is when it's finally the next morning. You have the one girl who survived the night, and she basically looks over and there's a school bus full of kids watching her murder someone, and she's just caught red-handed killing someone out of context. It was so funny. I love this season. I need to give it another rewatch because it's been a minute. My one major complaint, and this is kind of a major complaint, is the inclusion of the character Richard Ramirez, who is a real-life serial killer that was active during the 80s. Really good documentary just came out on Netflix about it called The Night Stalker. That was his moniker in the media, the name he himself preferred. The problem with him being a character on 1984 is not only that it's historically inaccurate to what actually happened, obviously, but it again is romanticizing in a way a character who is based on a real person who murdered people really not all that long ago in the grand scheme of things. And I'm assuming there's living relatives and people out there that are actively still affected by these murders. Actually, I know for a fact there's people because they were in that documentary on Netflix I watched. So I can't imagine any one of those type of people watching this season and being cool with them portraying him as this like sexy bad boy who likes rock and roll music. No, he actually committed very, very violent crimes against adults and children as well. So not cool. American Horror Story, I know they really like to integrate real world elements into the seasons, things that have happened, of course, in America. It's American Horror Story, which is fun and fine when it's very little tidbits, like when they had the Black Dahlia in Murder House. That just kind of was a little bit of a turnoff for me. I wish that they had done a character maybe inspired by Richard Ramirez, but not by that name, and trying to literally put the Night Stalker almost on a pedestal. So that's probably the only thing keeping it from being my #1 favorite season. Which brings me, of course, to my ultimate #1 favorite season of American Horror Story so far, which is the 6th season, Roanoke. I absolutely love Roanoke, and I know it's controversial, but I'll explain what makes me love it so much, and maybe it'll change your opinion on it a little bit. First things first, the marketing for this season was very different. Typically, in a normal year, as it gets closer to the air date, they will release the name and therefore the kind of theme of the season. But in season 6, which was Roanoke, they did not release the theme. All of the promo was very mysterious, and they were doing it intentionally, so every single person that tuned in to watch the premiere was going in blind, and that was my experience. Now, the season starts, and what sets this season apart for me is obviously the format. So I love found footage, and another guilty pleasure of mine is supernatural, like ghost documentaries. I also love true crime. So all those elements combined to make this season, and I was instantly hooked. So the whole show obviously is fiction, but depicted in the show, it's kind of meant to be like one of those ghost documentaries where there's people being interviewed about their real life, and then there are reenactments done by separate people playing the same character. I think the actors all did a great job, especially the ones that did the reenactment, really differentiated their character's character from their character. This is such a confusing season to talk about. This is why nobody likes it. So anyway, the ghost mockumentary, it was called My Roanoke Nightmare. That lasted for the first half of the season. The very next episode, you see the producer of the show going into a meeting talking about how to capitalize on the success of My Roanoke Nightmare, with which they make the decision to create a reality show where they place the real people with the actors that played them in the haunted house where all the shenanigans occurred. This, of course, devolves into a lot of chaos. Basically, this season has everything. The lost colony of Roanoke, ghost murder, a witch that lives in the woods, superficial actors, we got sexy gay ghosts, we got historical drama, allusions to the Blair Witch Project, which of course this season is found footage. Why wouldn't they do an homage to Blair Witch? Like, hello, that's the found footage movie. I just can't speak highly enough of this season for its creativity, and I think this is the only time that they took a dramatic risk as far as the format of the show, and for me, it was a payoff because I love that kind of stuff. So good. So good.
So good. I got you.
Am I canceled yet? So I think that's all I really have to say about Roanoke and American Horror Story. I'm really looking forward to the next season of American Horror Story, which will be the 10th installment in the series. This, of course, was delayed due to the pandemic, but I'm hoping that it's gonna come out in 2021. And in addition to American Horror Story Season 10, they're doing a new show that's kind of a spin-off called American Horror Stories, where every episode is going to be a different story rather than a story being a whole season. I think that gives them a lot of creative license to do more bold things, take more artistic risks, potentially have a larger revolving cast, and to also potentially do more tie-ins with other seasons because people live for that. And then that way they don't have to dedicate an entire portion of a new season to doing these tie-ins to the overall universe. So I'm looking forward to American Horror Stories, looking forward to season 10. Let me know your thoughts. Okay, that's it for today. I hope you had fun watching this video. Again, please let me know what your favorite season of American Horror Story is in the comments, or leave me your full tier list of best to worst, worst to best, ones you don't like, ones you do like. Start a fight in the comments. It'll be really funny. If you want to follow me outside of YouTube, I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Miko Zilla. Thank you again for watching this video. Please remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, especially if you're new, because me and the cat need more friends. And it's the pandemic, so I can't hang out with friends, so I need subscribers. And also it's free, just quick reminder that subscribing is free, so like please just do your boy a favor, do your boy a big solid. Anyway, I hope everyone's 2021 is off to a great start. You're all beautiful. I'm gonna go live in the woods as a witch. Bye!